I want to try to, I just found something here that was somehow it said that it was muted. Now, I don't know if that's going to make any difference or not.
Somehow it said
So,
that, I don't know if that's going to make
well, something got changed in the settings this morning, and I have no idea how, but it got something got muted on the board, not on the board, but here in the on the program that I use to put all this out on Facebook and YouTube. So if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, I apologize that we had a problem this morning in getting sound started, and I'm glad we've got it now. I think probably all of this is going to be on the podcast because I'm fairly certain that the sound was going there. All right, let's go back to South Carolina. I wanted to start there today because when you we want to talk about the budget. The House actually finished up the budget last week for South Carolina. We're going to talk about where some of the money's going, so that you'll have an idea about how your tax money is going to be spent, whether or not you're going to continue to get a 1% tax decrease on your income tax, and so we'll take a look at all that. But the first thing I want to do is play this cut of Representative Adam Morgan, because it's gone viral. You've probably already seen it. I think it's had like 1 million views already. But this was during the budget debate. This is while Representative Morgan was talking about why he represents his constituents instead of listening to commerce. Now, there's, and Representative Todd Rutherford basically challenges him in this cut and says, look, you're supposed to be listening to the people that are making South Carolina grow. You're supposed to be listening to the people over at Commerce that are making it possible for all these jobs to be brought into South Carolina. And you're listening to your constituents who may not understand all those things. And Adam Morgan straightens him out pretty quick by simply saying, look, I got elected to come to Columbia, not to listen to the special interest alone, but to listen to my constituents. They elect me. They tell me what concerns them. I hear from them regularly, and they wanted me, quite frankly, to vote against spending $1.3 billion on a Volkswagen project, $400 million of which is taxpayer cash. That's what the people back home want me to do. You're asking me to ignore this, and I can't do it because that's not what that's not what I'm supposed to do. Now, this is something that happened not in the context of the budget debate. This is something from the floor that took place back in March of 2023. But it still makes the point, and Adam Morgan makes the point, that a lot of people feel like that when we elect people to go to Columbia, they end up doing things that their constituents don't want because of the pressure that gets put on them in Columbia. And we could debate that. I mean, we can talk about the merits of when do you listen to the, quote, experts, and when do you listen to the people that elected you. But this has picked up a lot of following simply because I think that the reason that so many people have resonated with this is because this is how they feel. They feel like when I go vote, when I go exercise my constitutional right, and then that constitutional right is ignored by the people that I send into the legislature to represent me. They're not representing me. Representative form of government is what we're supposed to have. They seem to make decisions that go against what I and a lot of people I talk to that also vote for this person, what we want. And so I think that's why this resonated so solidly. Now, this is 2 minutes and 17 seconds, so it's a little bit longer than I usually try to play, but I want you to take a listen and I think you'll hear the passion and you'll hear the exchange with Representative Rutherford and why this has become such a viral clip. Here we go.
The pressure in here in Columbia is for me to not even vote red on the board. Y'all might not know this. A dark money entity that was created on Tuesday, the day after we voted for this, I went home and a attack piece went out in my whole district about the fact that I voted for this. I get that the people in Columbia, that the lobby wants me to either not vote or to vote green on this, but my constituents want me to vote red, and they want their tax money spent on core government functions, on their roads, on their schools. That's what they want their money spent on.
So,
they don't want us in here trying to play this government planning thing where we in our bureaus can figure out where the jobs should be, who should be employed, how much money should be allocated where in the private sector. It never works. It's socialism. It's never worked anywhere before. So what are we doing trying to do it here?
But would you consider the fact that South Carolina's track record on bringing major projects into this state has a winning record, and therefore, again, commerce should be listened to rather than those people back in your district that may not have ever brokered a deal, may not understand what it means of being a project, may not understand economic incentives. So what you're suggesting is we should listen to the people back home in your district rather than the people at Commerce that have been successful at bringing these mega deals to South Carolina.
Mr. Rutherford, I don't think that you could have espoused a philosophy that disagrees more fundamentally than me. I completely disagree with you, and I think that you believe what you just said. But no, I 100% am going to listen to the people back home who I represent in this House, and you should listen to the 40,000 people in your area, and not the bureaucrats at Commerce, and not the lobbyists, and not the multi-billion-dollar international corporations. You should listen to your constituents like I am. So yes, I will always fall back on the common sense of the wonderful people from Taylor's and Greenville Eastside, far more than I will ever listen to unelected bureaucrats, other representatives in here who have been here for far too long and have maybe managed a whole lot of these deals, and far more than I will ever listen to any member out
So,
there.
Mr. Morgan, we don't.
So there you go. This was Representative Adam Morgan, and this is a clip that has gone viral because of the stand that he took for the people that he represents. In a representative form of government, that's always going to be popular. When he talks about the wisdom of his people, and to denigrate the wisdom and knowledge of the people of his district, when the people who contact him certainly understand the issues. I mean, it's very difficult sometimes to get people to get engaged and get involved in political debate and discussion. A lot of times they may feel like maybe they don't have the knowledge that they need. A lot of times it may be because they're afraid of repercussions. But whatever the reason, when people contact a representative and they send them emails, they send them text messages, they leave phone messages, and they talk to them when they're out in the district, they talk about issues and they're knowledgeable about the money that's being spent. It's their tax money. They have strong feelings about how their tax money should be spent, and they certainly have a right to express that to their representative. And their representative should respect and receive that information and consider it as being a weighty factor in how they vote, because obviously they were elected by their district to represent the people in that district, and this is not something that they should take lightly. And Representative Morgan, I think, portrayed that as enthusiastically as it could be, and that's why that clip has gotten so much attention, because people, I think, are longing for accurate representation, not only in Columbia, but in Washington. They want their voice to be heard. They want to feel like their representatives, the people that they get behind, are standing on the principles that they campaigned on and that they got elected on, and then respond accordingly to what the people in the district voted for them to do. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? I mean, in a representative republic like we have, I think that's the way it's supposed to work, and that's why that resonates with so many people. All right, the House of Representatives, as we said, they gave its approval to the final budget, And this budget it's going to be a record 40.1 billion. Now, that's not the actual state budget, but that includes all of the federal money that's going to be coming in. And so when we look at the budget, the report on the budget says 13.2 billion. And that's not incorrect, but it only accounts, like we said, for money appropriated from the state's general fund, the pool of money collected from tax revenues. A lot of other funding in the spending plan comes from federal funds and other funds, which are revenues collected from fines, fees, assessments imposed on Palmetto State citizens. This is according to Fitz News, is what I'm looking at here to give you some information about the budget. So the budget this year commits $200 million to public teacher pay, which allows teachers to receive annual wage increases for their first 28 years of employment by the state, while raising the first-year teacher pay to $47,000 a year. So again, improving teacher pay. That's been something that every year for the last several years has been a priority, because South Carolina has been finding it difficult to hire and retain teachers. So they're trying to address it by increasing teacher pay. And teachers aren't the only state employees getting a raise. All state employees making less than $66,667 are going to receive a flat $1,000 raise, while those earning more will get a 1.5% increase. State employees will be the beneficiaries of $107.5 million expenditure to cover a health and dental plan insurance increase. This is automatic in the budget every year because state employees' insurance and dental is covered. It's just like in your business. It's like in any business, really. If you're providing insurance for your employees, there's going to be an increase, and the state chooses to cover that increase and to keep providing the insurance benefit. Some companies are cutting back. They're saying that they'll only pay a portion of the health insurance anymore, simply because it's become so expensive to cover an employee's entire health benefit. But those companies that continue, and of course the state continues to pay the health benefits, it's going to be an expenditure like this in the budget every year. And it's been 10 years, really. When you go back and look at history, increase in premiums is just something that everybody's going to have to deal with when it comes to insurance, and we know this. Law enforcement's going to get additional funding under the House budget. Lawmakers allocated $1.5 million, about $1.575, for 2 new trial teams. And this is something that Attorney General Alan Wilson has really been looking to see happen, simply because there's a big case backlog that people are having to wait an extraordinarily long amount of time, or at least too long, for their cases to be heard. And so this money is going to go to hire more people to make it possible to get the case backlog sort of taken care of. And the Attorney General said, look, we need to do this, and with this amount of money, we're going to make a promise here. We're never going to let it get this bad once we get there, once we get the backlog taken care of. South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, Mark Keel, saw the continuation of funding increases. He says that will help his agency retain employees in a tight labor market. He actually thanked the legislature for what they did for state law enforcement. South Carolina schools are earmarked to receive $20 million to harden entryways, install bulletproof glass, and otherwise increase their physical safety in the era of mass shooters, as well as $5 million for mapping schools to assist first responders in the event of an emergency. $200 million is going to go toward South Carolina's nearly 9,000 bridges that are slated to receive an overhaul. And this is something, we've got too many bridges that have been closed, and because they're in a state of disrepair. And so this is something that really needs to be done. I mean, the infrastructure in South Carolina, we have to keep it up, or we start to lose some of the businesses that want to move in the state. And of course, it just becomes dangerous when we're not taking care of our roads and bridges properly. The House budget sets aside $100 million to continue the reduction of the state's marginal income tax rate from 7% to 6% over the coming decade. So that's kind of an overview of what the budget is going to look like that's coming out of the House. Of course, it'll move over to the Senate and we'll see how it goes. I mean, the way the budget works in South Carolina, there's a lot of process that goes in before the budget ever comes to the House floor. It goes through all these different, of course, the House Ways and Means Committee, and then it gets a lot of looks and a lot of massaging before it gets to the House floor. And that's why it makes it possible for them usually to work through this, to deal with amendments. There's some criticism for the House leadership because it's said that amendments that are that are conservative amendments usually don't get the kind of support that they should when they're brought from the House floor once the budget gets there. Again, the process of the budget, there does need to be a mechanism where conservative amendments that are brought to the budget process, I think, need to have more time to be considered and debated on the House floor. The budget process, it can be complicated. It can be something that is, that has to be worked out, major parts of it because of the nature of the budget, that it has to be worked out sometimes in committee processes long before it gets to the floor. But constituents, people that send the legislatures to the South Carolina legislature, they need to have the opportunity to have their voices heard, and that more than likely happens on the floor of the House. It's not going to happen as much in the committee process because most people don't know when those committees are meeting unless they're, if you're like me and you're down there and you're following the process, but otherwise you just know the finished product, or you hear from your legislator that the budget is going to be debated and then amendments are brought to the floor. Most of the time these amendments get voted down, particularly if they make any kind of major changes or cuts, particularly to the budget that's being presented. And so it would, I think, in my view, it would be better in South Carolina if there was a little bit more of a robust debate about the amendment process once the budget in the House reaches the floor. All right, a couple of other things I want to get to today. I want to talk about this judge's ruling. Judge Scott McAfee ruled in the Fani Willis case out of Georgia, and a lot of people are saying, look, the ruling that he came up with, by the way, that ruling simply states that either Willis has got to get her entire office recused, she would have to hand the prosecution of the case of Donald Trump and all the other defendants in the RICO case down in Georgia, all of that would have to be handed over to another prosecutor team, or she's going to have to get rid of Nathan Wade. So the judge basically gave her a choice. Get rid of Wade can resign, or the entire office can step aside in order that there would not be a appearance of impropriety going forward in the case. And of course, Willis is not going to step aside. Not long after this ruling came down from McAfee, Wade stepped aside because there was no way that Willis, after all of this, was going to give up the prosecution of the case. But I want to read some of the decision to you. I want to go through some of these details of, there was a 23-page decision issued, and a lot of people are saying that it was Solomon-esque. In other words, what the judge tried to do here was split the baby because the judge is running for re-election in Georgia. Judges get elected down in Georgia, and to me, this is another good example of why we don't want that. Whatever we get in judicial reform in South Carolina, we don't want judges running for election because it puts way too much pressure on them when it comes to specific decisions and they're running for re-election. Now, to me, this decision by the judge was not as much an example of Solomon as it was an example of Samson. I mean, Samson just pulled the whole place down. You remember the story of Samson, of course, a tragic story in one sense, in that he was blind, he was tied up between the two pillars that was holding up the Philistine house of his captors, and God allowed his strength to return long enough to pull the pillars down and to bring down in his death. He brought all the Philistines, or at least a large number of Philistines, with him. And when I heard that this was sort of like Solomon, and I went back and read the case, rather than it being like Solomon, I mean, it sounds to me like a judge who's pulling the justice system down. I mean, he's bringing the whole thing down by stating over and over the impropriety, the way that it appeared that witnesses were not being honest. I mean, all of that is in here, and yet he comes to the conclusion that, well, we're gonna split the baby. We're gonna let you either got to let Nathan Wade go, or Vonnie, you're gonna have to recuse yourself and get rid of your whole office and hand this over to somebody else. And it's kind of like, how do you separate Bonnie and Clyde? I mean, if you have two people that are culpable, and I put out a tweet about this. I basically said, look, this judge's decision is kind of like putting Clyde in jail and allowing Bonnie to stay and to keep the gain that she got from the bank robberies. I mean, even though Bonnie rolls on Clyde. I mean, how does that make justice when it takes two people involved in this relationship that was improper? So how can you allow one of the people to stay and the other person to go and think that that's going to get rid of this whiff of impropriety that the judge talks about? Doesn't make any sense to me. But between October 20, here's what he wrote. Between October 2022 and May 2023, the district attorney and Wade traveled together on 4 occasions that resulted in documentable expenses. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because we've talked about it on the show before. They went to Miami, Aruba on a cruise, just kind of skirting through this a little bit. The two traveled to Belize, where Wade covered resort and restaurant expenses in the amount of about $3,000. In May, they traveled to Napa Valley, where Wade covered airfare, lodging, and Uber rides in the amount of $2,800 approximately. And then it talks about day trips to Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, and other places. So here's where the judge begins to comment on it. They also admitted to dining out on multiple occasions, taking turns covering the bill with seemingly full access to Wade's primary credit card statements. The defendants did not produce evidence of any further documentable expenses or gifts, nor were any revealed through the testimony. In total, defendants point to an aggregate documented benefit of at most approximately $12,000 to $15,000. And both testified that the district attorney, that would have been Fani Willis, regularly reimbursed Wade in cash. And if not reimbursed, the district attorney covered a comparable related expense. For example, the district attorney testified she reimbursed Wade in cash for the Aruba trip, which she said she estimated cost at around $2,000, and that she gave him money for both cruises. She further claimed that she reimbursed Wade for the entirety of the Belize trip and that she paid for the Napa Valley excursions. Finally, while Wade could have bought meals in 2020, which totaled more than $100, she would also regularly pay for his meals. Now, listen to this paragraph, because what you have to believe to say that this was not improper is that you have to believe Fani Willis's testimony and her father's testimony that he taught her to keep sacks of cash hidden around the house, that's just something that they did in their family. But she kept no record, absolutely no. I mean, any expenses that the district attorney has related to the work that she's hired to do for the people is supposed to be documented. And so you're handing out cash to someone, supposedly, to reimburse them for trips that you went on together, and you keep no record of it when you know that you're paying cash and there's not going to be any way for you to document the fact that you were reimbursing him apart from the record. Here's what the judge wrote. Such a reimbursement practice may be unusual, and the lack of any documentary corroboration understandably concerning. Yet the testimony withstood direct contradiction, was corroborated by other evidence, for example, her payment of airfare for two on the 2022 Miami trip, and was not so incredible as to be inherently unbelievable. And my question would be, how incredible would this story have to be for it to be unbelievable? What is the standard of incredibility here that would cause you to move into, I can't believe this? There was a best guesstimate that was offered that expenses were split completely evenly, and the district attorney may well have received a net benefit of several $100s. Despite this, after considering all the surrounding circumstances, the court finds that the evidence did not establish the district attorney's receipt of a material financial benefit as a result of her decision to hire and engage in a romantic relationship. He paid for the trips. This information was readily available. It was on his credit card. And all that she could come up with is, yeah, I reimbursed him with cash. You got to believe me. And the judge believed her. And so this is that he went on to say, without sufficient evidence that the district attorney acquired a personal stake in the prosecution or that her financial arrangements had any impact on the case, then the judge just went ahead and said, well, this is not something that we're going to consider to be a conflict. He wrote, Georgia law does not permit the finding of an actual conflict for simply making bad choices. When you look at this entire document, this ruling by the judge, it is scathing against Fani Willis. And you got to keep in mind that this is the same judge that's going to be the judge in the case that's going to hear all of the evidence against Trump and his co-defendants. And he doesn't have a very good opinion of Fani Willis in the way she decides to operate her office. I mean, I think that's the benefit for Trump. Andy McCarthy wrote about this. He said, you know, if she's already had her reputation tarnished, which she has, and a lot of this should be forwarded to the authorities in Georgia for the possibility, for one thing, for disbarment, because it could be said that Fani Willis committed perjury while she was on the stand, and so did Nathan Wade. And that needs to be investigated. This judge was not willing, in the context of this case, to determine that they lied, but that basically, he said, that could be done by another court. And there's a Georgia statute that says that if a judge or an official or an officer of the court discovers some kind of statements that could be perjury or any potential crime, that it has to be forwarded to the proper authorities for the possibility of prosecution. So here's how the judge in this case got around this. This court has a duty to confine itself to the relevant issues and applicable law properly before it. Other forums or sources of authority, such as the General Assembly, the Georgia State Ethics Commission, the State Bar of Georgia, the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, or the voters of Fulton County may offer feedback on the unanswered questions that linger. So in other words, I'm telling you, there's something fishy here. There's something that doesn't look right, but it's not this court's job to determine the full extent of what that is, but I'm recommending, or I'm saying, that there are other agencies in the state of Georgia that could take this up. And of course, the Georgia legislature is investigating Fani Willis, and it has subpoena power. And if they subpoena the text messages that were flowing back and forth during the time that supposedly Fani Willis and Nathan Wade were not in a romantic relationship, but there were these thousands of text messages, if the legislature, if those that are investigating this in the legislature subpoena those text messages, I think the jig is going to be up. Because you can imagine, people don't text each other the amount of times that Fani Willis and Nathan Wade were texting each other without there being something more than business going on. Likely. I mean, it's not for sure, of course, but I think if those text messages come out, it would be evidence that would be very difficult for them to refute. All right, here's another section. During argument, the defendants focused largely pivoted from the financial concerns to disproving the testimony of the district attorney, namely that her romantic relationship actually predated the November 2021 hiring of Wade. On that front, the court makes a few brief observations. First, the court finds itself unable to place any stock in the testimony of Terrence Bradley. I agree with that. We talked about this on the program. If you followed Terrence Bradley's testimony, I mean, it was all over the place. He was caught a couple of times in inconsistent statements. And the judge says his inconsistencies, demeanor, and generally non-responsive answers left far too brittle a foundation upon which to build any conclusions. While prior inconsistent statements can be considered as substantive evidence under Georgia law, Bradley's impeachment text message did not establish the basis for which he claimed such sweeping knowledge of Wade's personal affairs. In addition, while the testimony of Robin Yerdy raised doubts about the state's assertions, it ultimately lacked context and detail. Now, if you remember, Robin Yerdy testified under oath that she saw Wade and Fonnie Willis kissing and hugging at a time after Wade, or actually before, I should say, Wade was hired. In other words, that she gave eyewitness testimony, and she was in a position to know, and she gave this testimony saying, look, I saw them engaging in what amounted to intimate behavior prior to the date that they say that their relationship began. But the judge goes on, even after considering the proffered cell phone testimony from defendant Trump, along with the entirety of the other evidence, neither side was able to conclusively establish by a preponderance of the evidence when the relationship evolved into a romantic one. Now, what he's talking about here is the cell phone evidence is every time Nathan Wade and Fonnie Willis were together, the cell phone tower records would show where Wade was located. And it showed that he spent the night with Fonnie Willis several times. At least he was there and didn't leave until the next morning, according to the cell phone records. And the judge did not take that as conclusive evidence, along with eyewitness testimony. I mean, what fascinates me about this is that there are people sitting in jail today, and they're going to be there for a long time because they were convicted of serious crimes based on cell phone evidence coupled with eyewitness testimony. You don't really get much more evidence than that. Robin Yerdy's testimony, yeah, she could have given more context. She could have answered more questions. Maybe the defense didn't ask her enough questions when she testified, but what she did say should have been enough when you add in all the other evidence. And here's, after saying all of this, after saying that the preponderance of the evidence, it was not sufficient to determine when the relationship evolved into a romantic one, listen to the judge's next sentence. However, an odor of mendacity remains. The court is not, that is, an odor of lying, of not being truthful, of covering up. The court is not under an obligation to ferret out every instance of potential dishonesty from each witness or defendant ever presented in open court. No, but the court was supposed to ferret out whether or not there was enough of evidence presented for this trial to be disqualified for Fonnie Willis to be removed along with Nathan Wade, instead of just given the choice. The judge wrote, such an expectation would mean an end to the efficient disposition of criminal and civil proceedings, yet reasonable questions about whether the district attorney and her hand-selected lead attorney testified untruthfully about the timing of their relationship, further underpinning the finding of an appearance of impropriety and the need to make proportional efforts to cure it. So this is the judge is saying, here's the cure. We've got the appearance of impropriety. The cure is either Wade or Willis has to go, one or the other. That's the decision he came up with. Now, the judge went on to criticize Fonnie Willis for statements that she made in what he called in a speech in a church. He said, quote, "The same cannot be so easily said of the district attorney's prepared speech delivered before the congregation of a local Atlanta church on January 14, 2024. If you remember on the program, I played you excerpts from that speech, which was she was making comments that could be considered racist. In these public and televised comments, the district attorney complained that a Fulton County commissioner and so many others questioned her decision to hire Wade. When referring to her detractors throughout the speech, she frequently utilized the plural they. The state argues the speech was not aimed at any of the defendants in this case. Maybe so, but maybe not. Therein lies the danger of public comment by a prosecuting attorney. By including a reference to so many others on the heels of defendant Roman's motion, which instigated the entire controversy, the district attorney left that question open for the public to consider. And then she went on, he says, to frequently refer to Wade as the black man, while her other unchallenged assistant DAs, one were labeled one white woman and another a white man. So the effect of this speech was to cast racial aspersions and on an indicted defendant's decision to file this pretrial motion. So there, yes. I mean, after all of this, then the judge comes back and says, nope, not enough evidence, not enough to see here to throw the whole thing out. We're just going to get rid of either Willis and her whole team, which would mean getting rid of Nathan Wade, because Nathan Wade is under the authority of Willis, or Willis can or Wade can resign. Now, given that decision, of course, Wade is going to resign. And a lot of people reviewing this, including Andrew McCarthy and others, are saying that, again, this comes back to the fact that this judge is going to be running against a Democrat in this district, and the district, Fulton County, went 73% for Biden. 73% in 2020. And so he's worried about his job, and that's why he decided to find a way to protect Willis while giving Wade the boot, hoping that the voters will not see him as coming after Willis. And yet he was scathing in his opinion about Willis. He's basically frustrated. I really think this is a case of him going, you know, I wish I could just get rid of the whole mess, but actually I've got to face the voters. I think he knew that if he removed Willis from this case, that the Democrat machine, which is formidable in Fulton County, would come out for him 100%. They'd have the long knives out. And it would be very difficult for him to retain his judgeship. Now, maybe that wasn't any consideration. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there in the judge's mind, but I can tell you that that is a fact, and that to me, it's a fact that the pressure would have been on him for re-election, and I think that's a reason for us to never consider in South Carolina the possibility of electing judges directly, because that's the kind of pressure, that's the kind of thing that can result. You get judgments that are tentative, that take political issues into consideration. So this is the way the judge decided to handle it. And again, I think Willis is damaged. Now, is that going to matter in the trial going forward? I mean, it's obvious that this judge has a poor opinion of Willis. The fact that she made the speech in the church that he felt like was improper, the fact that there's an odor of mendacity still hanging over the whole thing, that she could have been totally dishonest. I mean, it's a scathing 23-page statement on her. And now she's got to bring this case. And it's got to be in front of him because he's the judge in the case. Is that going to make a difference? Well, that's why they have trials. We'll wait and see if it makes a difference. Is this going to make a difference in Fulton County for people that would vote for her? I mean, I've heard a lot of discussion over the weekend as I listened to different podcasts that were discussing this. They were saying, well, this is a remedy for the people of Fulton County. They can simply vote to not re-elect her. They can hold her accountable. I honestly don't think that's going to happen. I wish I was more optimistic that the people would vote according to what this judge found about her level of honesty, but I think I think with 73%, knowing that 73% supported Biden, I think it's going to be difficult for enough of those people to say, well, I'm not going to support Willis. Willis promised if they elected her, she would go after Trump. She went after Trump. She's got him on trial, and that's what the people wanted. And you know, it's unprecedented. Not until the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, have we seen open elections where people who were going to have the ability, prosecutors that were running for office, ran on a platform saying, elect me and I will go after so-and-so for you. I mean, this is a terrible way for the justice system to work, because when you run on that platform, then you're supposed to be looking at the evidence to see if a person needs to be charged with a crime, not looking at the evidence, using it as a campaign issue, getting elected, and then going after that person regardless of what the evidence says. And the same thing is true. This happened in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court. You had one of the Supreme Court justices that was elected in Wisconsin basically promised, you pick me and I'll protect abortion rights. You pick me and I'll undo everything that the Wisconsin Supreme Court will begin the process. It'll give us a liberal or a progressive majority. We'll begin the process of undoing everything. I mean, we've gone from Supreme Court justice candidates testifying before Congress, before the Senate, and not being able to state precisely where they would land on an issue, to judges that are getting elected in Wisconsin basically laying out an agenda and saying, vote for me and I'm going to push this agenda as a judge. Our justice system can't survive that. I mean, it cannot, because this allows personal agendas to replace any clear consideration of the law. All right, I wanted to move on and quickly talk about President Trump and this whole thing where President Trump is being accused of saying that if he's not elected in November, that the whole country is going to be in a bloodbath. It's going to be a terrible bloodbath. We're just going to have I guess most of the media outlets are saying things like NBC, other media outlets have published headlines saying that this bloodbath that Trump's calling for is that he's saying that if he's not elected, the entire country, it's going to be people going to war. It's going to be people that are his supporters that are going to cause this. That's essentially what they want you to believe. Well, the problem with that is that the whole bloodbath comment came in the context of Trump speaking about automobile manufacturing plants in Mexico that are owned by the Chinese, and that they're trying to undercut the American car industry, and Trump basically said, if you do that, I'm going to slap 100% tariff on you. And then within the context of this battle between Chinese-made cars in Mexico coming into the United States, he said if he's not elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. And he goes right back to talking about the tariffs and the Chinese. That's what if you put this in context, the bloodbath that he's referring to is what's going to happen with the automobile industry. It's a business comment. It's not calling for some type of violence by his supporters, which is what many of the major news outlets want you to believe. I want to play this clip because it's about 1 minute and 5 seconds, and you can hear the context that President Trump was talking about. Most of the news media is playing just the bloodbath comment and leaving out the previous discussion and the discussion that comes afterwards.
Mexico has taken, over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it, went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. if you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. A friend of mine,
Okay. Now, granted, he said that would be the least of it. And there are those who are saying, even though the context is being provided, there are those who are saying, no. He shifted right in the middle of the speech. He was saying that what he was saying about the cars coming across from Mexico was going to be the least of the bloodbath. Well, again, he's not calling that, even if he means that there are going to be other bad things that happen if he's not elected. He's not calling for or saying that those bad things are people that are going to go to the streets and start shedding blood. That there's no way that you can take that out of the context of that speech. And that's why a lot of people just do not put any stock in the media anymore, because it's obvious that the media is coming after President Trump. They take his comments out of context, and they do their best to cover up when President Biden is saying things that would normally get him into trouble. I want to see if I can find, I think I kept the clip here, which is President Biden was making a speech and he asked the audience to clap. This is over the weekend. It was yesterday. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day. And he basically told the crowd at a speech that he was making when he had the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, there, that when he celebrated the history of the Irish people in America, he made some statements, and then he tells the people, hey, what's up with you? You're supposed to be clapping here. Why aren't you clapping?
Ireland now is one of the top 10 investors in the United States economy, and our country stand proudly for liberty and against tyranny. We stand together and oppose Russia's brutal war of aggression in Ukraine. You can clap for that, please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how bad is it when the president actually has to say, okay, it's here where you clap? I wonder if the next thing that the Biden administration, the campaign, I should say, the Biden campaign is just going to get one of those neon applause signs, and they'll make it portable so that when he goes out and makes a speech, they can pull up the neon applause sign and just flip it on when it's time for the crowd to respond. And of course, he was talking about aid to Ukraine, and that's what he wanted the people to respond to that were in the room. Now, a little bit later, as they're winding down, and you've got, once again, you have the Prime Minister from Ireland, and he's there sitting in the chair. You know how usually they have the Prime Minister in one chair, the President in the other chair, they're facing each other. And they've finished their prepared remarks, and then the President gets a question. When he answers the question, which is a little bit strained, and then he gets another question. The minute he gets another question, I want you to hear what erupts in the room. You've got reporters trying to shout questions, and you've got Biden's aides pushing them out of the room. Now, this is the second time this has happened. I played a cut of this last week. His aides are scared to death for him to take a question that doesn't have a teleprompter attached to it. So here's that exchange.
Do you have any comments, sir, on Senator Schumer's speech on Israel yesterday?
Senator Schumer contacted my staff, my senior staff, who's going to make that speech, and I'm not going to elaborate on the speech. He made a good speech, and I think he expressed a serious concern, shared not only by him, but by many Americans.
Mr. President.
All yelling questions. And this goes on. This is like 30 seconds into the This is how afraid, this is the chaos that happens when the leader of the free world is simply being asked some questions where he doesn't have a teleprompter or doesn't have cards to go by. And this is the person who wants to be the president of the United States for another 4 years. I mean, he's at this state of his mental capacity at this moment, and yet we think that somehow if he gets elected, that's going to improve over the next 4 years. And then in the very same place, we've got the Washington Post calling for Kamala Harris to step aside for the good of the party. Now, there was a lot of, I mean, and this is what was said. This is Kathleen Parker. I mean, obviously, if he gets elected and he can't fulfill another 4 years, Kamala Harris is going to be president. But that's not making the Democrats feel any better. And so you have Kathleen Parker, who's a columnist for the Washington Post, and this is what she wrote. The Kamala conundrum comes down to this. She was picked because she was black and female, a combo tantamount to job security. Now that she's become a burden to the Democratic ticket, Biden can't fire her. This is the Washington Post that printed this. He can't risk alienating his base. Full stop. The seriousness of this situation can't be overstated. Biden's diminishing faculties, notwithstanding his relatively successful State of the Union address and his increasing physical frailty, are concerning. Her performance as second in command has been disappointing, to say the least. Americans have taken note. Though Democrats unsurprisingly like her more than Republicans do, a recent analysis by 538 set her average overall approval rating at just 37.2%, among the lowest recorded for a vice president. And then she ends up by saying, this is why I propose, with all due respect, that Harris step away from the ticket. So you've got, what have you got? You've got the Democrat Party recognizing that President Biden is in trouble. He's in trouble because of his mental and physical faculties. He's struggling with both. And then you've got Kamala Harris. So the remedy would be, well, it's okay if Biden can't make it 4 years because the vice president can step in. Problem is, Democrat voters don't like the vice president either. She's got the lowest approval rating of any vice president in history. And so here the Democrats are asking that she step aside, that she's not going to be the answer. That's not going to help people go out and vote for President Biden because of how unpopular she is. I mean, this is incredible. This election continues to be really fascinating on these points because it's just, when you look at what can happen, when you think about the trials that President Trump may or may not go through, I mean, I think this setback down in Georgia is likely. I think there's an opportunity for the defense in Georgia to appeal this judge's ruling because a lot of legal experts that are a lot smarter about this than me when it comes to the legal standard have said that he applied the wrong standard to the case, and that left them room to appeal. Plus, you've got a judge that's going to be hearing a case that he's not real happy with the prosecutor as it is. So I don't know that the Georgia case is actually going to end up happening before the election. The case in New York may happen. The document case, I don't think, has any chance of going forward. And neither, I think Jack Smith is not going to be able to prosecute either one of his federal cases, it doesn't look like, before the election. And so all of this playing into this election in 2024, one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. It's going to be incredible. And I hope you'll follow all of that right here on Truth in Politics and Culture. I'm always going to try to give you both truth in politics and about the culture. We'll actually try to do all three of those things here on the program. That's all the time we've got for today. I'll be back in the morning at 7:30 to 8:30. Apologize again to the folks on YouTube and Facebook this morning. Hopefully we've got our sound issues fixed and we'll start off on the right foot in the morning. God bless you. Have a great day.